And we are live. Welcome, welcome, family. It's a pleasure, as always, to have you in the house. As you can see, I have our very special guest, none other than Dr. Clyde Winters in the house for another fantastic, blacktastic show today. Let me just check your audio, Dr. Clyde. Let me just check that all is well your end. Rise up, Dr.
Hello,
Clyde.
hello, can you hear me?
Yes, that's fantastic. Hearing you loud and clear. I'm going to introduce you in just a moment's time. So, family, as you come through the door, please do welcome our wonderful guest. As always, it's a privilege and an honor to have Dr. Clyde in the house. As you can see, my video is sticking a little bit. Apologies for that, but hopefully it will get better as the evening goes on. You know, I have these challenges. So, family, thank you so much for joining us today. Just want to extend a heartfelt welcome to each and every one of you that are joining me on my show today. If it is your first time today, welcome, welcome. And for those who are regulars here, thank you so much. It's the Sister Shanice Show, and coming to you live and direct this Wednesday evening. So we're on episode 2 in our new series of hidden African history hidden in plain sight. This episode, we're going to be focusing on the Black Irish. We're going to be restoring the erased history of the Black Irish, the people in history who they actually tried, as they do, you know, to erase. But you know what we do? We are here, family, just to make sure that we are bringing you true history. So as you come through the door, please let us know that you're in the house. Please do take a moment to, you know, drop us a message and let us know that you're in the house. Just in case you don't know me, my name is Sister Shanice. I'm a presenter, researcher. I do my radio shows on the Big G Galaxy FBW. I'm a cultural historian, author of 6 books, and producer of scholarly works. And what I dedicate my time to doing is uncovering hidden chapters of our history. I'll tell you a bit about me, a little bit about me in a little while. But first of all, let me introduce to you our special guest, our honorable, none other than Dr. Clyde Winters. Yeah. Dr. Clyde Winters is my master teacher. He's a distinguished researcher, historian, linguist, and author of more than 50 books. And he spent over 50 years actually researching our experience. And over the course of his incredible career, he has just been uncovering so much new African history about ancient civilizations, about linguistics, about archaeology, and, you know, the African presence around the globe. And, you know, he's inspired countless researchers, including myself, and he's amassed so much work. He's got an extraordinary collection of research materials, and we're privileged today that he is going to be delivering a presentation for us. And it's one that gathers together some of the evidence that he has, you know, himself found over the last 50 years or so that he's been doing his scholarly investigation. So from one passionate individual who's passionate about African history to another who's been uncovering so many stories that have been overlooked. Let's welcome none other than our beloved Dr. Clyde Winters.
Hey. How's everybody doing out there in the world? You know, I'm here in Chicago, and I'm thinking about all the great things that we've done as African people. I hope everybody should have that book, Hidden in the Shadows. That's the book that is going to help you to really understand what's going on, right, going on in the world. And Sister Janice is doing even more work. And that book is the book. That's the book that we all need. That's the book that proves. I mean, we you shouldn't have to prove anything, but that book shows the deep history of Black people in Europe, the deep history of our people overseas, and everybody should have a copy of that book because that book will help you to be grounded with the knowledge of who you are, where you came from, and where we're going. Yes, where we're going.
Very important. Thank you so, so much, Dr. Clyde. And yeah, as you say, it lays the foundation as well. It brings the proof and the evidence that we were the original indigenous people of Britain. And, that is such an important foundation that all of us need to be aware of, especially, today in episode 2 of our series, where we're going to be looking at the Black Irish. There is still a big denial as to who the real Black Irish actually are or were. And, let me just jump over to the chat, welcome the guests, and then I'm going to go straight back to you so you can start your presentation for us today. After the presentation, I'm going to do some reading from the book that we're going into today, To Hell or Barbados, the ethnic cleansing of Ireland. And then we're going to have conversations and discussions along the way. So welcome, Teresa. It's great to have you in the house. She says, Hotep, and brightest greetings, Sister Shanice and Dr. Winters and family. I'm so fortunate to be here and to learn more about our great Black history. Be one forever, be one indeed. Thank you for joining us today, beloved. And we've got Ado Adosville in the house. Welcome. Where are you joining us from? It says Miss T from Cali. Is that short for California? In the house. Welcome. Looks like we got Adrienne in the house as well, saying good evening, everyone, and particularly Sister Shanice and Dr. Winters. Absolutely awesome. Welcome. Teresa says, Dr. Winters, we are so thankful that you are back with us. Continued health and blessings to you always. Yes, indeed, always. Blessings to you, Dr. Clyde. And we've got our Bevu in the house saying, glad to catch the live. We're glad you caught the live too. Always wonderful. Dora Val is in the house. Missed you for a little while, Dora Val. Great to have you in the house as well. And I know more of the family members will be coming through the door quite soon. And, we love to be joined by our family members. Spoke to our brother Kwame a few days ago because, as you know, he's normally a regular in the house, and I didn't see him last strong. I'm like, oh, where's our brother Kwame? Kwame Aboje, missing you. And so he said that he'll be catching the replays, but he'll be back in September. So we're gonna miss him. But, just send enough love out there to you and all the regulars, Sister Afri Jamal, the Jamaican John Crow, Brother Thomas, all the regulars, Sister Karen, Kev, all of you, enough love to you. Now, the apologies that my internet is sticking a little. You know how it goes. I think there's a lot of traffic at this time of day. But what we're going to do, we're going to go straight into today's presentation. It's going to be led by Dr. Clyde. So Dr. Clyde, if you can get your presentation ready, please, that would be absolutely awesome. And then I can hand over the reins to you. And after your presentation, we'll have a bit of a discussion, and then we'll go into the next phase of today's show. So hold tight, family, and take in the research information, okay? I can see your presentation, Dr. Clyde. Over to you.
Okay. So again, we're going to talk about the history of the Black Celts. And this is a very important part of Black history because the Celts, were the ancestors of many of the Irish. When we think about the Irish, we often believe in a sense that, okay, we have the Irish, but we've seen always these white Irish. And then because of the fact that we see white people in Ireland today, we assume that it was always like that. But no, it wasn't always like that. In this sheet, you can see on the right-hand side, you can see an authentic. This picture dates back. This dates back to the medieval period. And as you can see, these were Vikings. This is how your Vikings look. You see, they didn't look like the people that they put on TV and these mystery people. The Vikings look like you. The Vikings look like me. The Vikings look like us. And this is something that you have to understand when you're trying to understand the history of the Irish.
Mm.
You know, I've written a number of books that relate to blacks in Europe, and these books include the world history of the black race, blacks in Europe from prehistory to contemporary times, and the manufactured genetic origin, the fake European back migration. In these books, in a sense, I discuss the various histories of, in a sense, black people in Europe. These books will tell you the role that black people played in Europe, and it will give you a lot of intimate information. So you can order these books from Amazon.com. They're always available on Amazon.com. So if you're interested in these books, please go and purchase them. The Black Celts, yes, yes. There were many Black Europeans. These are some of the various statuettes of the first Europeans. And these first Europeans, these were people in a sense that archaeologists found their skeletons in tombs. And when they excavated these skeletons, they reconstructed their faces. And as you can see in these reconstructed faces, they were black people like you, black people like us. A lot of times, in a sense, I know Diop, when Diop talks about Cro-Magnon man, he says that this was the first European, and many people believe that Cro-Magnon man, in a sense, looked like looked like Burt Reynolds or something like that. No, he didn't. He looked more like like black people like us, like them. Whites want you to believe that you were just musicians and slaves. And this lecture we discussed the history of the Celts, the Black Celts. Davis and Thurman and Crania Britannica. The first says the first blacks in the British Isles were small sized. They represented the pygmy called Twa and Anu. Davis and Thurman in Crania Britannica said the Celtic people were short and dark. They noted that Scotland was full of these little dark, curly haired people. The Celts were originally black people. Ephorus in 405 BC claimed that the Celts were blacks or Ethiopians, according to William and Robert Chambers. Chambers Information for the People, Volume 2, London and Edinburgh, 1884, page 66. This this document used to be online, but every time I've talked about the Celts a little earlier, and every time I notify the world that there's evidence of black people, then the whites seem to take it down. They seem to take down anything to make it appear as though that this stuff isn't true. But again, if you could find this particular document, Robert Chambers, Chambers Information for the People, Volume 2, London and Edinburgh, 1884, page 66. If you can look that up and find it, it will show that I'm correct. J. Rogers and Sex and Race, Volume 1, page 97, 196, said the Celts continued to be recognized as blacks by Tacitus, who wrote about the black Celts and Picts. And, Sister Shanice, she's given you a fine presentation over the years about the Picts, who were also, in a sense, some of the early black people in the British Isles. The Celts on the mainland of Europe were called Iberians or Silures. Though the original Celts were black, over time their name was stolen by Caucasian Europeans. Father O'Gortney has discussed the history of the Celts. He makes it clear that the original Celts were the Iberians. You can see this is some of the maps of the major Celtic cultural areas, Iberia, and also, in a sense, the British Isles. Forrest wrote in 340 BC, next is a land called Celtica. As far as the sea, lying off Sardinia. The greatest people, ethnos in the west. For the Indians occupy almost all the land toward the east and toward the south. The Ethiopians lying near the south wind, and Celts have from the west wind up to the summer sunset, and the Scythians that to the north. So the Indians live between the summer and winter sunrise. The Celts the opposite. between the equinox and the summer sunset, legend has it. So the peoples are four, equal in the crowd and number of their inhabitants. That the Ethiopians and Scythians has the most desert land because of the fiery parts of the one and the watery parts of the other. The Celts were Greek customs, since they are familiar with Greece through receiving travelers. They conduct their assemblies with music and are eager for it as a taming influence. Their so-called extreme north pillar, which is very tall, rising on the headland of the wave-tossed sea. In the places near the pillar live those who end up last of the Celts, the Nicians, and the last of the Istrians, who reach down into the Adriatic. They say that Istar, Danube, receives the source of the flow from here. Of course, this is something that many people don't understand is that the ancient Europeans wrote about these black people. One of the reasons that many of the earliest authors about the ancient history of black people in Europe came from America, came from came from America and were in a sense foundational black Americans, was because of the fact that back in the day Greece, Greek, and Latin. They were taught normally in schools. I don't know about over in Britain. Were they taught over in Britain too, Shanice?
Yes, they did.
Okay, so you could learn Greek and Latin in high school, and so
Yeah.
automatically, in a sense, that gave you access to these ancient people, their religion, and also in a sense their history and culture. The Iberians were probably conquered by the Ligurians. It is suggested that the Ligurians may be represented by the modern Basque of Spain. The Ligurians took the name Celts. So we find, in a sense, that another name for the Celts was Ligurians. The Ligurians or Celts were conquered by the Gaulish speaking people. The Gauls conquered the Ligurians and pushed them into Spain. It was these Gauls who imposed their language on the Iberian and Ligurian Celts. The Germans conquered the Gaulish Celts, and Gaulish disappeared around the 4th century AD. This is supposed to be a document written in a Gaulish language. Dr. Mason reported on the Highlanders of Canada. He said that they were descendants of the Black Celts. Dr. Mason made it clear these Highlanders spoke Celtic and had African faces. This comes from Dr. Manson, 1875, The Guile of the Far West, The Academy, October 30th, page 451, Black Celts. Again, in a sense, some of these documents you can find online, but as I said before, anytime I post this stuff, the Europeans, they come and they take it down. The African Celts lived in Hungary through the Middle Ages. Here you can see some of the pictures of the various Celts. We see, in a sense, Celerius, number one. We see Bruce and Hercules, number two. You guys can come back to the sheet and see some of the representations of these various Celts. But as you can see, the representation of these Celts from Budapest all the way into Greece were always, in a sense, of African people, bearded African people. But you can see, in a sense, that they did have the phenotypical features associated with African people like you and myself.
Mhm.
Here's, in a sense, a picture of one of the pictures of one of the Celts. See his long sword, see his helmet. This would be, in a sense, how maybe he would have looked as a real life person, sword in hand, axe. The Celts came from Iberia. Pliny said the Celts were Ethiopians. An early man in Britain by W. Boyd Dawkins, the Celts says the Celts came from Iberia. Pliny says the Celts were Ethiopians. An early man in Britain, W. Boyd Dawkins, tells us that the Anu, again, in a sense, I'm talking about the small black people that occupied Europe and parts of Africa, were coming to the Pyrenees. The same people were found in Scotland, as represented by the Black Highlanders. And in Ireland, there were the Black Celts. The Celts came to Ireland in 500 BC. The Journal Anthropological Institute of Great Britain, Ireland, volume 17, London, 1888, noted that, and I quote, Black Celts were Iberian, dark-skinned, black hair, eyes, and dolichocephalic, small-sized. James H. Anderson, Riddles of Prehistoric Times, said that the predominant settlement of the Black Celts was west of the Shannon River in Ireland. The Celts originally lived in Brittany and Aquitaine. W. Boyd Dawkins tells us the Ainu were common in the Pyrenees. The Celts came to Ireland, as I said earlier, 500 BC. Again, this is some of the pictures of the various Celts. Number one is a chief god of the Celts in northern Britain. Then Northumberland, we can see in a sense number two, another Celt. Then in number 3 and 4, we see Norfolk Celts and a bronze king's crown in 200 AD. We see Antoine's wall in Scotland. A slab of the defeated Britons is number 5. And then one of the many Moorish coat of arms of medieval English royal families. You know, one thing that many people don't really understand is that when we talk about the Moors of Europe, it's very important that you understand that these Moors, they were not just in a sense Muslims. They were not just Muslims. These black Moors were also in a sense, Christians. And that's why you find in a sense this dichotomy between the Christians and the Muslims. And it's kind of sad that they were engaged in so many wars. The history of blacks in Britain has been recorded by Jerome Massey, Godfrey Higgins, and David McRitchie. Massey in the Book of Beginnings talked about the Egyptian origin of the foundation of black Britons. Massey said, and I quote, "A great nation called Celtai, of whom the Druids were the priests, spread themselves almost the earth, and are traced in their gigantic monuments from India to the extremity of Britain." Massey said the Celts were Cushites. Massey explained that Stonehenge was built by a foundation of black British Celtic priests called Druids. Godfrey Higgins discussed the African religious origins of the foundation of black Britons. By the 4th century BC, many people in Britain were speaking Common Brittonic, an ancient Celtic language. The Greek explorer Pytheas used the term Pretnike to describe the people of Britain from the Celtic Pretini. The painted ones, or people of the forms, as some of the Britons painted themselves in patterns of dye and blue wad. The oldest documented name for the lands of Britain and Ireland was Albion and Irene, as written in ancient Greek meaning white and fertile country. By the 1st century AD, Albion was still used to describe the land, but it was replaced by Britannia, which became Britannia, the Roman term which we know the island today. Further north, people continued calling the land Albion, and eventually it became a name to describe Scotland, which is why today Scotland is also called Alba. The Gauls were Belgians, according to Father O'Grody. The Irish and Welsh are descendants of these Gauls. These Gauls spoke Gaulish and Gaelic. All the black Celts in Britain were not erased by Gauls and the later British. The Romans noticed that the British spirit of resistance was nurtured by the Druids. The stronghold of the Druids was on the Mona Island in North Wales. In 600 AD, the Roman governor Suetonius Paulinus marched his army to Alglacé to remove the Druids from power. The Romans came to Britain in 43 AD. They came to rule a very variable land that had abundant natural resources. The Baradanacs did not accept their rule. They worshiped Druidism. Tacitus wrote about the foundation of Black Britons. Here you can see in a panel from back in the day, and this is supposed to represent some of the early Celts. And Tacitus wrote, "The enrichment of thy general and inciting each other never to flinch before a band of females and fanatics. They charged behind the standards, cut down all who met them, and enveloped the enemy in his own flames." Strabo tells us about the Druid sacrifice of their enemies as having their throats cut over a cauldron. And I quote, "Their wives who would accompany them on their expeditions were attended by priestesses who were seers. These were gray-haired, clad in white, with flaxen cloths fastened on with claps, girt with girdles of bronze, and the barefooted. Now, sword in hand, these priestesses would meet with the prisoners of war throughout the camp, and having first crowned them with wreaths, would lead them to brazen vessels of about 20 amphorae. And they had a raised platform on which the priestess would mount, and then bending over the kettle, would cut the throat of each prisoner after he had been lifted up. And from the blood that poured forth into the vessel, some of the priestesses would draw a prophecy, while still others would split open the body, and from an inspection of the entrails would utter a prophecy of victory for their own people. And during the battles, they would beat on the hides that were stretched over the wicker bodies of the wagons, and in this way produce an unearthly noise. Again, in a sense, these are these are people that didn't play. They were about business. Again, here's another picture of some of the Celts. See them on their horses. You can see them with their swords, spears, things like that. The Roman historian Tacitus recorded their version of the events. On the shore stood the opposing army with its dense array of armed warriors, while between the ranks dashed women in black attire like the Furies, with hair disheveled, waving brands all around. The Druids lifting up their hands to heaven and pouring forth dreadful imprecations. Sacred scared our soldiers by the unfamiliar sight, so that as if their limbs were paralyzed, they stood motionless and exposed to wounds. The Celts in Britain slowly declined in power after the Romans came into the UK. Again, in a sense, if you want to find out more about these European people, the Black Irish, get my book, The World History of the Black Race. Blacks in Europe from Prehistoric to Contemporary Times, and the Manufactured Genetic Origins, the fake European back migration. You know, these books in a sense can give you a more detailed account and understanding of the Black people who lived in who lived in the country. You know, but what I want you to understand is when we're talking about the people who came to Barbados and the Irish who came to Barbados, it's very important to understand that these were not the white Irish that we see in Ireland today. These, in a sense, were these, in a sense, were Black Irish people like you, Black Irish people like me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Clyde, for laying a foundation. You've provided us there with so many sources, you know, that we can go and look up and read about for ourselves. So thank you so much for that. And I know when you do a presentation like this and you just whiz through it so quickly, so many slides, and you just sail through it. But, you know, as quickly as you delivered it, I know that it would have taken you maybe, I don't know, 50, 100 hours worth of reading and worth of research to actually put that together. Because for every slide where you've quoted a particular source and where you've, you know, extracted some text, you would have had to read the book, you would have had to find that information, and then obviously include it in the presentation. And then obviously all of the work to put the presentation itself together. I don't think most people who don't prepare presentations understand the amount of research and the amount of time that actually goes into putting something like this together. So we want to thank you so much for your works, Dr. Clyde. Very informative as well. So family, if you are in any doubt whatsoever about the origins of the Irish, you have Dr. Clyde's presentation that you can go back and look over. You can check the sources for yourself if, you know, it's still available. Because as Dr. Clyde was saying, one of the things that, you know, Europeans tended to do a lot is they wrote everything. They wrote down everything, you know, after destroying all of our books and all of our cities and kingdoms and everything, they would write about it and they would report it to their parliament. They would report what they've done to their kings, and there'd be and a lot of the letters that were written in the 16th, 15th, 14th centuries is actually still available today. And when we quote these sources, quite often the authors of those books, they themselves have done a huge amount of research. And of course, you know, when you're looking at the ancient books, they're much closer to the time of the event as well. And so they're likely to be more familiar with the story. So, for example, if I was to write about the Windrush generation of the 50s and 60s in Britain, you know, I'm very familiar with those stories, and more so than someone who might write about it in 200 years' time. And so when you get these books from someone who has written about events very close to the incident, and when they're giving you a description, you know, of the population, of the people, and when they're saying they were dark skinned, curly hair, swarty, you know, small statured, etc., they are describing the people as they saw them. And in that presentation, we were hearing a description of the Black Irish. Let me go over to the chat and just welcome everybody again and see if there's any comments, any questions for you, Dr. Clyde. Thanks again for that presentation. Arbev is saying, peace and joy to you, Sister Shanice and Dr. Clyde. Thank you so much. And 1,000 blessings is coming from Sybil as well. Thank you, Jack Jonas. Great to have you in the house. So family, if you have any questions about that presentation, you can just drop them in the chat. Dr. Clyde, I was just saying a little bit about, you know, what it takes to do the research. And, you know, you've taught me your research technique. And so I am under no illusion whatsoever the amount of work that actually goes into putting together a presentation like that. Do you want to give people a little bit of a flavor of what it takes to put together that sort of presentation, the research, the exploration, the investigation, maybe your methodology?
Well, it's what you have to do to really make good presentations is, number one, you have to do the research. You have to try to read as much as you can that relates to the topic that you want to present. Okay, then as you read the material, if you're reading an original document, on that document, hopefully you should write in the columns, or if it's a book, you should write in the the outside of the book. You should make notes. Make notes about those things that are discussed in an article in a book that you feel are significant. That way you can come back and discuss those points later. Another thing you do is that you try to, in a sense, make sure that you become aware of the pros and cons. You want to know both sides. Even though you may only talk about one, you want to know both sides so that you can get a better understanding of the topic. And always remember, in a sense, is that the European is never going to give you the full facts. So if you happen to read about an original document, you may want to go and find that document. For example, back in the day, when I wrote my master's thesis was called Zan to Zan. And I called it Zan to Zan was that because black to black, you know. And but what I found, in a sense, at that time when I wrote my master's thesis back in 1972, there wasn't that much information written in English. No, 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 no. All of the information was mainly in French and German. Luckily, when I was in high school, I was one of those guys who wanted to be a playboy, so I wanted to learn the language of love, français. And so luckily, I studied French for 4 years, and I learned to write it real. I learned to write. I used to could write French real good. I could write in French real good. I could always read it, and so then that allowed me to gain insight because much of the research in the 70s was in disjointed things. It was either in Arabic or it was in French and German because they didn't really, in a sense, want you to know it. They didn't want to really translate the materials because they didn't want people to have access to it. See, the problem was is that when they wrote these books, you know, we were enslaved in the Caribbean, in the Americas, and because of the fact that we were enslaved, they didn't think for one moment that we would ever be free. They didn't think for one moment that not only would we be able to be free, but we would be able, in a sense, to examine those documents ourselves. And so what they did is that they would publish these documents, and they made it much more easier back in the day. And so many foundational Black Americans who could speak Arab, who could speak in a sense Latin and Greek, they had learned about these blacks because the the the, the the ancient scholars were happy to talk about the black civilizations. They were in a sense, you know, proud of the black what black people had accomplished because they knew that those white people they knew they had defeated them. So hey, what do they care? But today, in a sense, because of the fact Europeans are on shaky ground, they don't want you to know your history. They don't want you to know the positive things about our history because they want, in a sense, be able to tell us lies and lead us down a false path.
That's so true. So true. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Clyde. And so, hence why it's really, really important for us to do our own research. The closer, the older the books, the closer to the events, the more likely you are to find the truth than you are since the 19th century, 20th century scientists that were trying to prove that we were inferior, etc. etc. So let's see if we've got any comments in the chat, any questions. Wagwan, Afrijamo, good to have you in the house. She said, Wagwan, Sister Shanice, all Africans in the chat watching from Ghana. Yeah, man, we got your rains from Ghana now, I tell you. Oh, by the way, I hear you've been having some fantastic weather in the UKKK. Whoa, summer has arrived in Great Britain. Fantastic. We put the great in front of Britain just for a little while it's got the sunshine, okay? So blessings to you, Barim. Good to have you in the house as well. Barim's saying a very great point that our enslavers never expected us to be free. For real. They thought they had us for eternity, that free labor for eternity. But no, we had some freedom fighters. We had some resistors who decided that they would rather die fighting than live a life as a slave. And we are eternally, eternally grateful to them. Okay, so it's 8:38 now. We do have a chapter that we want to read and discuss today. In line with our theme, the Black Irish, who have been erased from history. Thank you again, Dr. Clyde Winters, for laying the foundations and bringing us the knowledge of all those sources that are available to us should we want to research further the African history of the Black Irish in Britain. So let me pull up just a few slides, Dr. Clyde, just for a little while. And before I go into the reading, should I do it that way around? Yeah, let me do it that way around. Let's share.
Sounds fine to me.
Thank you so much. So let's see if this will work for me. Get the PowerPoint presentation ready. There's no sound or anything today. No, it's just a few slides that I want to share with the family. And it's just to bring people up to date, really, should they be joining us for the first time. And if you are joining us for the first time, welcome, welcome. It's great to have you join us. Great to have you in the house. We are on episode 2 in our series, African History Hidden in Plain Sight. And let's see if this will actually open up for me. Oh, it's doing a little spin. Okay, fantastic. Here we are. So here's the flyer for today's show. This is the flyer you'll see when you go to YouTube. Please do share it for us because, as we were talking about earlier, there's so much work that actually goes into preparing these presentations. We want it to reach our families so that we can begin to change the narrative, okay? They've given us a version of history which is just completely fabricated, and we are doing the research. Every year, every decade, more information becomes available and it's out there for us to see. And so when this information becomes available and researchers find it, what we want to do is bring that to the attention of the family. So again, it was an honor. It is an honor and a privilege to have our guest with us, our master teacher, Dr. Clyde Winters. And thanks again for that presentation. Now, last strong, somebody asked a question, you know, if the Irish were Black, basically the question was like, if the Irish were Black, why are they not speaking the African language? Well, there is a really important piece of research that I'd like you all to go away and look up. It was a groundbreaking piece of research that was published in 2011. And it was a study that was published in the journal Science by evolutionary biologist Dr. Quintin Atkinson. And he's from the University of Auckland in New Zealand. And he had a unique way of actually studying languages. Now, most people who study languages, what they tend to do is they try and reconstruct the vocabularies. They try and directly reconstruct the vocabularies. But instead, what he did was that he analyzed the phonemes. These were the distinct sounds, such as the consonants and the vowels and the tones. And he did that for 504 languages worldwide. So this was a major study. And what he discovered, and this is like the shattering part of the research that made everybody's jaw drop. What he found is that there was a serial effect in all of the languages, and basically concluded after all of his linguistic analysis and looking at the diversity and the drops and all the different languages, etc., and the sound diversity, he concluded that the pattern suggests that spoken languages actually emerged in Africa about 50,000 to 70,000 years ago. Now, that language that emerged in Africa 50 to 70,000 years ago actually served as a critical tool that basically spurred early human expansion across the globe. Now, if you watch my earlier series, you will see that I have actually presented and shown evidence of the African expansion across the globe. All the continents on this globe were originally occupied by us as Africans. We were the original people on all of those continents, and our ancestors left behind the evidence of that. And in terms of language now, the conclusion of this groundbreaking research actually reconfirms all of that. So with the language that he studied, he identified the Indo-European family of languages. And that Indo-European family of languages spans, you know, from India, across Irania, all the way to Russia. And it includes all the Germanic languages, the Roman languages, the Celtic languages, Albanian. So he's grouped them together, and they've been grouped together in their, distinctive styles. And so you can do your own studies, look up that piece of research for yourself to learn more about the ancient languages, okay? And there is a relationship between the Semitic and the Old Celtic language as well. And, as European and Asian languages, as I said, they can trace their roots back to a single mother ancestral Euroasiatic language, which was spoken in Africa 50 to 70,000 years ago. And that language comes from Africa all the way over Portugal, Siberia, from English to Mandarin. All those languages can fit within, the origins of African language, the oldest African languages that go back to the southern region of Africa. So check out that piece of research, okay? There you have the response to that question, and I hope that satisfies you. And this is why, as an African family, we were able to communicate with each other wherever we were in the globe. Today, our languages sound very different, but there's a lot of connectivity between the languages. I mean, when I was even looking at the Africans in Japan, I was highlighting that there are words in Japanese that you will find in the Igbo languages. It was the same, words in a Chinese Mandarin language that you can find in West African languages. There are many similarities in the languages. So if you're interested in that, then do more research, okay? All righty. So we're on episode 2 today. We're going to be focusing on the aftermath of the rebellion that happened in Ireland in 1641. We talked about the rebellion in chapter 1, and this was a really controversial episode in Irish history. And we're going to go on now to look at what happened after the 1641, and in particular, we're going to look at the siege and the capture of Wexford in Ireland. You're going to hear first-hand accounts of the scenes there as it was described. Be prepared. There was extraordinary violence. The soldiers basically stormed the town. The defenders, the civilians, everybody was caught up. There was enormous amounts of bloodshed. If we think that it's just today that the English have been shedding blood across this globe, my, even Britain wasn't spared when the English were shedding blood, because those Africans, those of us, our ancestors who were in Britain at the time that the English gained power in Parliament. I mean, there were many wars that were always happening in Britain anyway. The English were always fighting against the Irish, and the Scottish were fighting each other. Different towns were fighting each other. Unfortunately, we were a people who were divided among ourselves, so divided among ourselves that we were constantly fighting each other and at war with each other. And in so doing, what that then did was it left the door wide open for us to be conquered. And this is why history is so important, because we need to learn from our history. We were so divided that even when outsiders were coming to fight against us and take our towns, we were unable quite often to come together to fight the enemy until it was too late. Yeah, religion got in the way. But when it came to us being, when it came to a war being waged against us, religion didn't matter. The religious figures, the priests, the monks, the nuns, all of them were singled out, for the most heinous atrocities. Homes, businesses, churches, public buildings, all destroyed. Large parts of Ireland was just totally devastated by the English under Oliver Cromwell. Okay, and so we're going to talk about and learn what happened in Wexford in Ireland. And we need to overs that in this particular instance, and if it happened in the past, it can happen in the future, when a people are being targeted by a particular group of people, in this instance, the English, and if they're coming after you, and they want your land, they are going to remove everybody on that land. There's going to be consequences for the entire population. If war is being used as a means to take over your land, there is consequences for the entire population. The entire population is displaced whilst the land is being repossessed. And those people are being transported. Those that survive it and haven't been murdered during the process then have to endure, a life of misery. So there's so much more that I can say there, but let me leave it here for now and have that just as an introduction to today's session, where we're going to be looking at African history hidden in plain sight. And this is going to give you a real insight into how the Irish were actually erased, that, you know, some of what went on to erase the Irish from Ireland. And then next week, we're going to go into what happened with those who survived, what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so let me stop the share there and go over to Dr. Clyde, first of all, to see if he wants to jump in with any opening remarks before we go into chapter 2 in the book. Dr. Clyde, are you still with us?
Still here. You can we can go ahead and continue.
Okay.
We already presented the you know, the information I thought that people need to know about the ancestry of the Irish.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that foundation. Definitely. Let me jump over to the chat first to see if there's any comments before we go in. Jungle Bunny's in the house. Love and blessings black at you, Jungle Bunny. Great to have you in the house. Jack Jonas says, a question. Were the Druids Hebrews or Kemetic? Dr. Clyde, were the Druids Hebrews or Kemetic? That's a really interesting question, because I know that, you know, the Hebrew Israelites are doing a lot of work to try and find their ancestries. And you do have ancestors in Ireland. I have actually come across in books, you know, where they've talked about the Hebrews and their journey to Ireland and Scotland, and bringing the what do they call it, the golden stool with them, and the close relationship between the Hebrews and the royalists, the royals. So there's a lot, but then, you know, I haven't been following any one particular group. I've been looking at us as Africans, and there have been instances where I know that they have come from Kemet, especially the royals. There's a family kind of relationship that existed for centuries across all the royals, who were the royals of all the countries around the world, from sort of Egypt outwards. You could trace family connections, even Scotland, Queen Scotia, who Scotland was named after, or Queen Scota, who Scotland was named after. She was the daughter of an Egyptian pharaoh. Yeah, and so there were family ties and family connections across the globe amongst all of these early ancient Black royals, some of whom ruled parts of Europe up to the 17th century. And but the Druids, I don't know if the Druids were Hebrews, but I do know that the Druids had a major impact and influence all across the globe. You know, they were erecting huge, you know, megalithic structures that were used for their ceremonial purposes around the globe. But let me allow Dr. Clyde to jump in here and, you know, add something. Dr. Clyde, do you want to jump in?
There were some there is evidence that some Hebrew Israelites may have migrated into England, and in fact, many of the royals claimed that they had that ancestry. So nine to one, they were there, but it wasn't as though that the vast majority would have been Hebrew Israelites. These were people, in a sense, who were Christian. And again, it's very important to understand that when we talk about the Moors of Europe, you have to remember, in a sense, that they were not all Muslims. That many Moors were Christians, and they had been Christians all of their lives. And so then, therefore, in a sense, Christianity had deep roots in Europe. You know, everybody may have didn't adopt a religion until much later, but Christianity did have deep roots in the country. And it's very important to understand that there would have been some Hebrew Israelites in Britain at that time. Some of them were associated with the royals, but most of the people were still mainly practicing Druidism. They were with the Druid religion instead of, in a sense, Christianity.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Clyde. I hope that answers the question, Jack. But at some point in the future, you know, I'll dig deeper. We'll dig deeper along with Dr. Clyde, hopefully, and we will try and follow, yeah, the journey of the Hebrews, okay? Because I have come across them before. Dorivel, great to have you in the house. Our Bev is saying, how will us Black Brits and UK Black Irish take back our land? Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's really important for us to recognize that we were the original owners of those lands, because if you don't even know that, that Ireland and Scotland and England and Wales actually belong to our ancestors, if you don't know that, then, you won't even be thinking about how to get back your lands. But once you know that you are the owners of something and that it was taken from you, stolen from you, and that you were shipped halfway across the other side of the world, and you are the descendant of those who were shipped to the other side of the world, then when it comes to reparations, yeah, those lands need to be added indeed.
And
And mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and it's very important to remember in a sense is that they know who you are. They know your ancestry. They know in a sense that today I think the UN recognizes that indigenous people have a right to their lands, and they have a right to in a sense to their heritages. And that's one of the reasons why they spend so much time trying to get us not to associate or believe that we were associated with the original inhabitants of the British Isles, the original inhabitants of the Americas. They don't want you to believe that these people were black. They does say they were black, a black group, but they wasn't black like you. And the reason they say that is because the fact, in a sense, is that they stole your land, and thieves do not want to give it back, and so they're trying to do everything in their power to make sure that you don't have the evidence, even though we're trying to find the evidence, and we need some of you guys out there to even do research too. They don't want you to be able, in a sense, to demand your land back. See, I mean, we should just, Shanice, you should get a gang of people to say, all of you whites out, go back over there to France.
Go
Go
back to
to
the
France,
Caucasus
go to
Mountains.
Brittany, go there, get out of our land.
Yeah, go back to the Caucasus Mountains, And we joke about it, but you're going to hear from what we read that these people, when it came to taking our land, they're serious. The depths of the evil and the wickedness that these people are prepared to go to take your land if they want it. We've got too much humanity in us to stoop to those levels. I don't know how we're going to survive their onslaught, their continued, aggression against us, because their aggression is continuing today. It's just in different formats. It's happening through GMO foods. It's happening through the healthcare system. It's happening through their armies, army bases on our land, their insurgencies, their military bases. We are under constant attack. The economic sanctions, them controlling our finances, our resources, and everything. We have been squeezed now to just a small section of the globe when we, at one time, were everywhere. I don't know how we're going to survive. People tell me in the chat, how are we going to survive this continued onslaught? If nature doesn't deal with them, how are we going to survive? God, we're not bad or wicked like them. You're on mute, Dr. Clyde. We're not bad or wicked like them, so we can't deal with
We're
them.
going to survive. I'd like to read something from that chapter on page 28, the second paragraph. On the 3rd of October, Cromwell summoned the town to surrender in a letter to the Senate. The letter replied that he desired to consult the mayor and other officials before giving an answer. While letters were being exchanged between Senate and the Lord Protector, the mayor and aldermen, and Cromwell at present sack the strong waters and strong beer. In other words, in a sense, they didn't even they pretended that they wanted to negotiate a surrender when in reality they were going to slaughter the people anyway. Negotiation for the surrender went on for several days. In the meantime, Cromwell stood his big guns so that if negotiations broke down, they were in position to battle the castle, the key to the town. Cromwell began to lose patience with what he regarded as the deliberate delaying tactic of Senat. And on 11 October, his big guns began the cannonade of the castle walls. Within a few hours, some breaks were made, and Senat sent four of his officers to parley for terms. One of the four chosen was a Captain Stafford, governor of the castle. But again, as you can see, they had no intention of really, in a sense, trying to negotiate. They came to destroy, they came to rape, they came to take. Let's look at our page 29, the second paragraph.
Let me start at the beginning first,
Okay, go
and then
ahead.
then you can jump ahead. All righty. So just to set the context, we're talking about the rape of Wexford. And here's a quote. It says, "Before God's altar fell sacred victims, holy priests of the Lord. Of those who were seized outside the church, some were scourged, some were thrown into chains and imprisoned, while others were hanged or put to death by cruel tortures. The others," it says, "oh, the blood of our noblest citizens was shed so that it inundated the streets. There was hardly a house that was not defiled with carnage and filled with wailing." That was written by Dr. Nicholas French, who's a bishop, and he was writing to the Papal Nuncio in January 1673 about what had happened in Wexford. And you heard there that there was hardly a house that hadn't been affected. The priests, the nuns, they were scourged, they were thrown into chains, they were imprisoned, and others were hanged. But the worst part of this is that it said the blood of our noblest citizens was shed so that it inundated, the blood inundated the streets. So this was taking place immediately after the capture and sack of Drogheda, which is somewhere else in Ireland that needs to be read about, because the horrors, the horrific incidences that happened in Drogheda is still talked about in history today. So Cromwell actually sent a body of his men under Colonel Chidley to Dunkirk, which fell without a shot being fired. Now, the reason why that happened is because what happened in Drogheda went across Ireland. Cromwell battered the place with the guns, that there was so much bloodshed. The whole city was sacked. It was torched. People were hanged, beaten, skinned up. All sorts of things was going on. And so they were going, Cromwell and his army was going from city to city, from town to town, to take the cities and to take the towns. And as Dr. Clyde just read, they were out to take the castle. So in every town, there was a castle, and the castle was like the stronghold, or it was like the city gates to the city. So you had your castle, you had your walls around the castle, and within the castle, you had your population, your industries, etc., etc. But outside the city walls would have been where people would have been doing their farming, their animal husbandry, etc., etc. So in times of war, they all retreat into the city and they close up the city walls. And so Cromwell, he would come with those big guns, you know, the cannon ones, yeah? And they would fire the cannon and it would beat down the city wall. Well, with this one, at Dunkirk, basically him and his army was able to take it without a single shot being fired. Another part of the army went to Trim, another place, which had been abandoned by Ormond in such haste that the stores, ammunition, and guns which Colonel Aston had begged for were left abandoned. So basically, Ormond, who was like a colonel heading up an army, he heard that Cromwell was coming. Instead of staying and fighting, they basically left in haste. And then Cromwell returned to Dublin, an acclaimed hero. He left the city within a fortnight, heading south with his 4 great guns that had battered Drogheda. He also had with him 4,000 foot soldiers, 1,200 horsemen, and 400 dragoons in his train. So, wow, just imagine 4,000 soldiers coming towards your town, 1,200 on horseback, 400 dragoons, and these big guns. So, castle after castle, strong point after strong point, either surrendered to him or the defenders fled at his approach. On the 29th of September, the parliamentary fleet under Sir George Askew reached the harbour of Wexford. They had sailed along the coast to give close support to the parliamentary army on the way south. And you know, we've done in previous sessions where what our ancestors tended to do was to build their castles along the coast. So quite often when you go along the coastlines of England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales, you'll find all these castles because they tended to use the sea as their highway. You know, they would go in ships and they'd go up and down the seas. On the 1st of October, Cromwell's army actually camped before the walls of the city. Ormond was determined to hold Wexford, of vital importance to him because it was through it that he managed to obtain all of his supplies of arms and ammunition from the continent. Now, the townspeople were, as usual, divided in their loyalties. And this is a big problem that I've been reading throughout. And you've probably picked up on this as well, Dr. Clyde, how divided we were as a people. Their loyalties were divided. Some of the old Irish, represented by a man named Rochford, a recorder of the town, had already been in correspondence with Cromwell and were anxious to come to terms with him. So basically you had some who were in negotiations behind the scenes with Cromwell and were relying on Cromwell more than they were Ormond, who was supposed to be leading the regiment. And to them, Lord Inchiquin, who we'll hear a lot about, had sent 2 regiments of horses into the town, and that was a great enemy to, Inchiquin was a great enemy to Cromwell, because they remembered his devastation at Munster, another Irish town, and his massacre of the defenders of Cashel. And it was only when Sir Edmund Butler, another Catholic brother of Ormond, arrived with his forces that they accepted that they were going to go under this lieutenant. So that's where you came in, Dr. Clyde, and you were talking about the negotiations that were supposed to be happening. They were trying to placate Cromwell and his men. They sent them rum and strong beers, but, you know, Cromwell wasn't buying it. He set up his guns anyway. Okay, so back to you now. So we've set the scene. Yeah, you've got all of these soldiers on foot, on horseback, the big guns, the dragoons, you know, these men, they want to take your town, they want to take your city. Right, where are you jumping to, Dr. Clyde? Page 29? Oops, you're on mute.
Yeah, the second paragraph. Cromwell's soldiers again ran amok in Wexford, and their officers seemed incapable of restraining them. Cromwell needed the town for winter quarters, but the soldiers did so much damage to property that the town became uninhabitable. You see.
Yes, go ahead, Dr. Clyde.
When you think about it, is that they weren't chivalrous. They wasn't really trying to fight a war. They wasn't really trying to fight a war on terms of right and wrong. They came to destroy. They wanted to destroy the Irish. They wanted to wipe out. They wanted to wipe out all the people, wipe out their memory, wipe out everything. Cromwell's soldiers again ran amok in Wexford, and their officers seemed incapable of restraining them. Cromwell needed the town for winter quarters. They killed indiscriminately defenders and civilians alike. Priests, monks, and nuns were again especially singled out and tortured before being killed. Think about that. They didn't even want to give them the honor of just killing. They had to torture them. Think about that torturing.
There was it was a religious war as well. So they hated the priests, they hated the monks, they hated the nuns, they hated the Catholic religion, of Ireland. And so they especially singled out, those priests and monks, tortured them before killing them. Carry on, please, Dr. Clive.
This is borne out in a letter to the Papal Nuncio, written by Dr. Nicholas French, the Bishop of Ferns, who was lying ill in a neighboring town and thus escaped the slaughter. And I quote, "On that fatal day of October 11, 1649, I lost everything I had. Wexford, my native town, then abundant in merchandise, ships, and wealth, was taken at the sword's point by the plague of England's Cromwell and sacked by an infuriated soldiery. They just took everything. They didn't want to they didn't want to give the people any solace."
Yeah. I want to reinforce that as well, Dr. Clive. He said, this priest was saying that Wexford was abounding in merchandise. It was a rich city, abounding in merchandise, ships, and wealth. And now all of that was taken at the point of the sword by Cromwell and his infuriated soldiers. Yeah, carry on, Dr. Clive.
Oh, Reverend Dennis Murphy, S.J., in Cromwell in Ireland, 1885, quote a report. And I quote, "On the 11th of October, His Excellency took Wexford by storm, and in it 31 pieces of ordnance, besides those in ships, 40 vessels in the harbor, great store of plunder. 2,000 were slain of Ormond's soldiers in the town." Cromwell himself wrote to John Bradshaw, president of Council of State, "I believe in all there was lost at the enemy not many less than 2,000, and I believe not 20 of yours killed, from first to the last of the siege." Think about that. Only 20 of his men was killed. That meant that the other people didn't put up that much of a resistance. They just was there to sack, murder, and take.
Hear the trickery. You're going to hear why it was so easy for them in the next paragraph. Go ahead, Dr. Clive.
The defenders obviously just threw down their arms and surrendered. So
imagine, Dr. Clive. So now we know why, they were able to slaughter 2,000 of the soldiers in that town so easily. Those soldiers threw down their arms and surrendered. Right? So if you surrender, you put up the white flag. If you had any mercy, you would take them as prisoners. But no, they surrendered. And what did they do? Then they were armed. Obviously, Cromwell's army was still armed. All these people put down their arms and they were probably told, okay, move away from your arms. So they weren't able to pick it up again and defend themselves. And they slaughtered them. Carry on, Dr. Clyde.
Okay.
Sir Edmund.
According to some writers of the period, a massacre of some 300 women took place at a cross in Wexford. Every one, I'm turning to page 30. Every one of them was killed, and rings which they wore were hacked off their fingers. Just look at the terror. Just terrible.
Yeah. As if it wasn't bad enough. So they slaughtered 2,000 of the soldiers, which maybe would have been men, more likely would have been the men, slaughtered and killed all of those in their defensiveness position, and then massacred 300 women at a cross in Wexford, and then hacked off the rings off of their fingers. The cruelty. And Cromwell officers did nothing to stop the slaughter. So these are Cromwell's soldiers who are just going amok. And because the town was uninhabitable and the place stunk of rotting corpses, he decided to pull out his army from Wexford and march on to the next objective. And 2 days later, he approached Ross. So, Dr. Clyde, this is what happened in Wexford. This was a town in Ireland, one of the many towns Yeah, so after Drogheda, a number of towns, the people fled or they just, surrendered without a shot being fired. But Rexford obviously were initially going to put up a fight, or they didn't surrender quick enough. But by the time they did surrender and they were defenseless, his army turned on them. And not only did they slaughter all the men, but the women as well. Do you want to continue reading, Dr. Clyde?
Okay, the second paragraph. His troops were now weary of the campaign and regretted the destruction of Wexford. Cromwell was forced to leave one of his big guns behind his men, almost in a state of mutiny, had refused to haul it. Ross was defended by a body of the Catholic Confederation Army under Sir Lucas Taffy, a young and inexperienced man. Cromwell sent his usual demand for surrender to avoid an infusion of blood. See what he said? He would always do that trick. If you surrender, you'll be okay. But then we see what happened. He would decimate him and kill him. Taft replied that he was ready to surrender, provided that his men.
Must be a war crime, isn't it, Dr. Clyde? It must be a war crime to
It is.
actually slaughter people who after they've surrendered.
That's right.
But
And once you show the white flag, you're supposed to. That's throughout all armies of the world. That once you show the white flag, you shouldn't hurt those people. Taft replied that he was ready to surrender, provided that his men were allowed to march out with arms, bag and baggage. If the lives of the citizens were spared, and if they were granted liberty of conscience. Cromwell immediately replied, Sir, to what I formerly offered, I shall make good. For that which you mentioned concerning liberty of conscience, I meddle not with any man's conscience. But if by liberty of conscience you mean a liberty to exercise the mass, I judge it best to use plain dealing and to let you know where the Parliament of England have power that will not be allowed of. In other words, he didn't want them to do a mass. He didn't want them to do any no Catholic religious practice were going to be allowed. After only 3 shots, Taft surrendered. Cromwell, in an unexpected show of magnanimity, allowed the defenders to march out of the town with arms, bag, and baggage, and with drums and colors. 500 English soldiers of Ichiquin's regiment, who were among the defenders, went over to the parliamentary side. So again, as you can see, that it was excuse me, as you can see, it was Protestants and Catholics on both sides. And then once the fighting was over, as you can see, the Protestants joined the English, and so they became an even larger force to attack the next cities. 500 English soldiers of Ichiquin's regiment, who were among the defenders, went over to the parliamentary side. The remaining 1,500 went with Taft to Kilkenny. This was yet another blow to Ormond's plan of campaign, as he had expected Ross to hold out for some considerable time. Cromwell intended to use Ross as winter quarters, but his plans were changed by the singular stroke of good fortune. The garrison of Cork revolted. Under the command of Lord Broghill, the son of Richard Boyle, the first Earl of Cork, it declared for Parliament and drove the Irish inhabitants out of the city. Other towns in Munster also followed suit. Youghal, Brandon, Baltimore, Marlow, Cappoquin, and Dungarvan. The Royalists lost some of the best fortified centers in this revolt, which caused a further split between the Protestants under Ormond and Lunchman and the soldiers of the Catholic Confederacy. In other words, since both Protestants and Catholics were fighting on the same side, but after a while, the Protestants would always turn against their Catholic, compatriots, and maybe, turn on them. Illness prevented.
Just to add there as well, what we see happening is that because the fear of Cromwell and the ruthlessness of his soldiers was so much so that castle after castle, town after town was just basically giving up to giving it over to Cromwell. And so, and not only that, but some of these towns that had Irish in them were chasing the Irish out. They were like, listen, get out of town, get out of town. We don't want you in our city, because if you're here, Cromwell and his army is going to come and take the city. Because as you said, Cromwell, he wanted those towns and his cities to be Protestants. He wanted to win them over for the parliamentarians. And so, you know, as a stroke of good luck, he's saying a lot of these cities actually drove the Catholics out, the Irish out. So he didn't even have to go in and slaughter the people there. But it didn't end there for those people. We will hear. Carry on, Dr. Clyde. Okay. Illness.
Illness prevented Cromwell from marching to the court immediately. He remained in Ross, very sick and crazy in his health. Writing to William Linthal, he confided that a considerable part of your army is fitter for the hospitals than the field, and added a significant point. If the enemy did not know it, I should have held it impolite to have written. They know it, yet they know not what to do. At this time, Ormond had an army of 13,000 men and 4,000 horse, and was further strengthened by the arrival of Hugh O'Neill, Owen Roe's nephew, with a force of 1,500 foot and 500 horse. They made one stipulation on joining Ormond, that they should fight by themselves, a further proof of the disunity in Ormond's camp. Cromwell left Ross on the 21st of February, apparently fully recovered from his illness, but leaving some of his sick men behind. Ormond estimated that the parliamentary force army had only an effective fighting force of some 4,000 foot, 2,000 horse, and 500 dragoons. Despite the superiority of his own army, he made no attempt to engage them in battle, and allowed them to march unhindered on Waterford, Cromwell's last objective before going into winter quarters. The parliamentarians anticipated that the city would surrender without a fight, having in mind the fate of Drogheda and Wexford. Indeed, the mayor and certain wealthy citizens wanted to surrender immediately, but the governor, Lieutenant General Richard Farrell, who had much experience of sieges in Flanders, was made of sterner staff. Excuse me. He had 2,000 Ulstermen with him, and the city, which was protected with strong defenses and heavy, well-sited artillery. He returned an uncompromised rejection to Cromwell's demand for surrender. Cromwell, realizing that a long siege would be impossible in winter, wisely decided to withdraw. The weather had turned foul, and the ground became so muddy that it would not bear the weight of the large gun. Again, as you can see, Cromwell was real slick. When he knew the people was going to fight, then he, in a sense, would try to change his mind, or maybe try to go talk negotiation, or just kind of lead them along. So he mainly wanted to make sure that he could get the people who were weak and the people, in a sense, who didn't want to fight. Okay, Cromwell, commenting on his losses in a letter to Linthal, wrote, and I quote, thus you see how God mingles out the cup to us. Parliamentarianism refused the service of Catholic doctors because they were convinced that they would poison them.
Sorry about that, Dr. Clyde. I think you jumped forward quite a bit there. Just rewind and come again for us. So you read up to the part where the guns couldn't bear the weight, up there in the first paragraph.
Okay.
So he decided on, yeah. So during the short time of the siege.
During the short time the siege lasted, 1,000 men died of malaria and dysentery. Because of the state of the ground and the weakness of the remainder of his army, he was forced to abandon his remaining 3 heavy guns. Excuse me. On 2 December, Cromwell began a march toward Dungarvan. It being, he wrote, so terrible day as ever I marched in my life. He lost over 1,000 men on the march, including one of his senior officers, Colonel Horton, and his own cousin, also called Oliver. Cromwell commented on his losses in a letter to Lenthal, wrote, thus, you see how God mingles out the cup to us. Parliamentarians refused the service of Catholic doctors because they were convinced that they would poison them. Our condition, one wrote, for want of physicians is sad, being fain to trust our lives to the popish doctor's hands. Excuse me. So again, as you can see, they weren't all unified. It was the Protestants didn't trust the Catholics, and the Catholics didn't trust the Protestants, but they were supposed to be fighting a war to unite the country when they were really in a slick way getting rid of all of the Irish so they could dominate the land.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And just to say as well that obviously the Catholics had a heart because, these people, Cromwell's army was dying. 1,000 of them had died on the march. There was sickness, disease, and they were having to rely on the Catholic doctors. Yeah. So parliamentarians refused the services of the Catholic doctors because they were convinced that they would poison them. But their condition, it got so bad for want of a physician that they had to put their lives in the popish doctors. Those are the same, enemies of theirs, the Irish doctors. Now, if the Irish doctors were as wicked as they were, they would have dealt with them when they were at their weakest, wouldn't they? They would have terminated their lives, but they never. Carry on. So they put their hands in the popish doctors when they fell sick. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And all of this came out in a letter, and the letter was called the Perfect Durinol, dated the 8th of January, 1650.
Okay. A rumor swept the army that Cromwell had poisoned him out of jealousy, although 2 days later he gave the funeral oration at Joan's burial. In Youghal, Cromwell met up with Lord Broghill with some 2,500 men of the southern garrison that had recently gone over to Parliament. The army remained at Youghal until the end of January, enjoying a well-earned rest. Recruits, medicines, and provisions poured in from England, but the sojourner was no idle rest for Cromwell. He made a tour of almost all the cities and towns that had gone over to the parliamentary cause. His first visit was to Cork, accompanied by Lord Broghill. And here, according to Thomas Ebers, clerk of the council, His Excellency was received with very hearty and noble entertainment. At Kinsale, the mayor came out and delivered to him the town mace and keys of the gates. Instead of returning them to the mayor, he handed them over to Colonel Stuber, whom he appointed as governor of the town. He said that he had been told that the mayor was an Irishman and a papist, and that he judged it inconvenient to entrust a place of such importance to one of their creed. When later he was told that Stuber was not over scrupulous in his religious duties, Cromwell is reported to have replied, "Maybe not, but as he is a soldier, he has honor, and therefore we will let his religion alone this time. It was while in winter quarters in Youghal that Cromwell received what became known as the Clomenois decree. The bishops and leading clergy of Ireland, 25 in all, assembled there on 4th of December, 1649, and declared, "May we hereby declare as a most certain truth that the enemy's resolution is to extirpate the Catholic religion, and it is notoriously known that by the acts of Parliament called the Acts of Subscription, the estate of the inhabitants of this kingdom are sold to those so that there remaineth now no more but to put the purchasers in possession by the power of forces drawn out of England, and for the common sort of people intending at the close of their conquest, if they can effect the same, as God forbid, to root out the commons also, and plant this land with colonies, so to be brought hither out of England, as witness the number only have already sent hence from the tobacco island, and put enemies in their place." In other words, Cromwell wanted to bring in more Englishmen and send the Irish to the tobacco fields in Barbados and other parts of the Caribbean. So, and some of the other work I've read about this time, they made it seem as though, it was hard to get Cromwell to really send people to the Caribbean. But as you can see, when you really look at the authentic statements written during that time, you can see that Cromwell was going to make that a key effort to send the Irish, remove the Irish from Ireland, especially the Catholics. The Tobacco Island.
Yeah, and just that it was quite brave of the bishops and the clergy to confront them and to declare that that is what they believed the intention was. Because, we've already read about the heinous ways that they treated and abused those bishops and the leading clergy. The priests, the monks, the nuns, they were singled out, for horrible torture. And here they are standing up in an assembly in 1649, and it's basically to say, we know about the Act of Parliament. In fact, you go look up the Acts of Subscription of Estates, and they're saying, we know that you want to remove all of the inhabitants of this kingdom. We know that you've already sold off our land and our property, and that the people who have purchased it, now want to come in and take possession of it. And we know that your army, God forbid, is going to be used to root out, all of us, and then to send us to those colonies and to send us to the Tobacco Islands. And to put their enemies, those are the English, in their place. Yes, so carry on, please, Dr. Clyde.
The Tobacco Island was, of course, Barbados. Cromwell issued a blistering reply to the decree.
So, that's such an important point there. Sorry about that. Just want to reinforce that. Here we have confirmation written in this book, if it wasn't clear before, that what the priests were saying and what the priests were claiming is that we know what the intention of the English is. We're familiar with that Act of Parliament. We know you want to dispossess us of our land, and you've already sent a number of our people to the Tobacco Islands, and you've already started bringing in the English and giving them our land, and we know that what you want to do is to send more of us to the Tobacco Islands. So you've just read, where are the Tobacco Islands?
Barbados.
Barbados.
But they had,
Yes.
King Charles had already sent 31,000 Irish in 1631, he sent about 20,000 Irish into slavery in Barbados at that early point. So that's why he said they knew what they wanted to do.
Right.
They wanted to get some workers for those islands.
Right. Yes. Carry on, please.
The background was, of
You
course,
okay to
Barbados.
continue?
Cromwell issued a blistering reply to the
Sorry,
decree. He wrote in Young
sorry about
Girls,
that, Dr. Clyde.
hmm,
Where have you jumped to? Okay, so Cromwell issued a blistering reply to the decrees. Yeah, so he wrote in Yonghua. Yeah. So we're going to hear from Cromwell now in response to the the priests and what the bishops had to say. Yeah, go ahead, please.
it was first printed in Cork and reprinted in London in March 1650. And I quote,
Mm.
here is your argument. The design is to extirpate the Catholic religion. But this is not to be done but by the massacring, banishing, or otherwise destroying the Catholic inhabitants. Well, your words are massacre, destroy, and banish. Good. Now, give us an instance of of our man, of one man, since my coming into Ireland, not in arms, massacring, destroyed, or banished, concerning the massacre, or the destruction of whom justice had not been done, or endeavored to be done. And as for the other banishment, I must now speak unto the people, whom you would delude, and whom this most concerns, that they may know in this also what to expect at my hands. Excuse me. The question is of the destruction of life, or of that which is little inferior to it, to wit, of banishment. It hath not hitherto been inflicted upon any but such who, being in arms, might justly, upon the terms they were taken, have been put to the death, as those who are instanced in your declaration to be sent to the Tobacco Islands. In other words, he was arguing that this is a new tactic. Usually you didn't banish people or take away people's land unless they fought you. You didn't take away people's land and send them to another place unless there had been a problem. But these people hadn't caused any harm. They didn't try to fight back. They were being in a sense submissive. And even though they were being submissive and trying to get along with the English, they still felt they had to kill them, they had to get rid of them, and they had to take the land and give the land to the people in England.
Exactly. And then here is Cromwell saying, you show me one incident where, there hasn't been a man in arms and has justly deserved to be massacred and destroyed. Basically telling the bishop, how dare you suggest that this is what we've been doing? Give me one instance. And so let me carry on from here for a little while,
Okay, go
Dr.
ahead.
Clive. The writer of this book then says, as I would say, and I'm sure you would say, Cromwell seems to have forgotten in his reply the innocent men, women, and children who were massacred at Drogheda and Wexford. Okay, so we didn't read about Drogheda, but we certainly read about Wexford. So we do know what happened at Wexford. We know that they had surrendered. They were not in arms, and him and his men had massacred them. So the bishop was speaking the truth about the tactics of Cromwell, but Cromwell didn't like being confronted with the truth. So the bishops mentioned the number they have already sent hence to the Tobacco Islands, but they could not have foreseen that the following decade, 50,000 innocent people would be sent there as slave labor by the man who admitted it was little inferior to a destruction of lives. So a decade later, 50,000 Irish people had been sent to the Tobacco Islands from Ireland. How many of us know that people were being sent from Ireland to Barbados, and here it says, as slave labor? Yeah? The
And
bishops
see,
the
that's a very
number.
important point. That's a very important
Yeah.
point, is that many people believe that the Irish came as indentured servants. No, 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 no. Only the white Irish. The white Irish came as indentured servants during the potato famine. The
Mhm.
black
And that
Irish,
was
they
a
were taking
hundred
their
years
chattel
later.
slaves.
That was 100 years later. The
Right.
famine, the Irish famine was 100 years later. So at the moment we're still in like the 1700s, when the famine was in the 1800s, wasn't it? And
Yeah,
so
that was
here they
200
are
years.
in 16, yeah, here they are in like 1650. They're just sending Irish down to Barbados. 50,000 is like a population of, some cities during that time. And they were sent down as slave labor by the man who admitted it was little inferior to a destruction of life. As for the nobility, gentry, and commons of Ireland, instead of being left to enjoy their goods, liberties, and lives, they were uprooted and forcefully transplanted to the poorest province of Ireland, which was Connaught. Now, how many times in history have we heard that, Dr. Clyde, where, these armies, these invaders have gone in, they've uprooted the indigenous people, the native people, and those that have left after taking all their towns and cities, those who have left, they've pushed them to one corner of their own country. And it tends to be the less fertile part of the country. We heard about that happening in South Africa when the Boers went into South Africa. This was happening in Zimbabwe when the Boers and the English went into
And
Zimbabwe,
the
took all the
Nazis,
fertile land from these
the
people.
Nazis when
The
they took over
Nazis
Europe.
did, the Germans in Namibia as well, the Nama people, where they pushed them into, the remotest parts of the hills and in the jungle. But this is a typical war strategy. And here we have it here in the 1600s. Yeah. So as you say, it's been going on for hundreds of years. So by the 29th of January 1650, Cromwell's parliamentary army was ready and eager to take the field. Hey, they love blood, they love war. Cromwell, in a letter from Cork on the 20th of January, wrote, "The army is in good health, that regiments which lately had marched only 400 men, now the march is 800 to 900. Only 5 major cities now remained in the hands of the royalists, and these cities were Waterford, Clonmel, Limerick, Galway, and Kilkenny. Cromwell's next objective was Kilkenny, the headquarters of the Catholic Confederacy. Ormond, see, Ormond's still around, had made it his winter headquarters. Doesn't tragedy seem to follow this Ormond? Anyway, Ormond had made it his winter headquarters and had taken the opportunity to fortify it. He left it at the beginning of January to recruit more men and to go replenish his dwindling stores of arms and ammunition. Again, he found dissension in the ranks of the Irish army. Lord Dillon, with 2,500 foot, refused his orders to remain and hold the city, and with his men marched north. Hey. So when he'd gone, so had 2,500 men under Lord Dillon picked up and gone. At Kilkenny, Cromwell issued his usual demand for its surrender. The governor, Walter Butler, another Catholic brother of Ormond, refused, but the mayor, unbeknown to the governor, established a communication with Cromwell, and on the 28th of March, the city and the castle were given up on condition that the city paid £2,000 as a gratuity to the parliamentary army. So here, more splits and more divisions, Ormond's refusing to give up the city, but then the mayor, behind his back, is having separate negotiations with Cromwell. Anyway, Cromwell did not remain long in Kilkenny, where a plague was raging, but marched on to Clonmel, which was held by Hugh O'Neill with a force of 1,500 men. As usual, Cromwell called for the surrender of the town, but was met with a blank refusal. Cromwell set up his remaining artillery pieces and battered the walls, eventually making a breach. O'Neill had erected inner defences of timber and stone and sighted his guns so that they could sweep the parliamentary ranks as they advanced through the breach. At 8 o'clock on the morning of the 27th of April, the parliamentarians rushed in, and as they did so, the Irish guns opened up on them. Within an hour, they had lost over 1,000 men. Cromwell, waiting outside the gate, saw the few survivors retreating through the breach and was much vexed as ever he was, since he first put on a helmet against the king for such a repulse he did not usually meet with. As foot soldiers refused to advance a second time, Cromwell called up his cavalry under the command of his best officers. They rode through the breach, but, like the infantry, were also devastated by O'Neill's cleverly sighted guns and retreated, leaving 2,000 of their numbers dead within the town. So what we can see there is that, if you are under a great kind of colonel who's got a strategy and a plan, you can beat Cromwell's army. He knew that those big guns would be able to batter the walls. But what they didn't expect is that once they all went charging in through the breach, which he had predicted they would do, they would have their guns set ready to annihilate them. And 2,000 of Cromwell's men lay dead within the town. Cromwell was on the point of raising the siege when a regiment on foot on 300 horses reached him. To save face, he decided to remain and starve out the defenders. So this was another tactic that he's used before in other sieges as well. And it takes me back to, a strategy that they used quite often during those kind of eras and before. Even Hannibal, he laid siege, didn't he, to the Romans, and he was out at their city gates for well over a decade. Well, anyway, Cromwell, he decided that he is going to sit it out. So this siege, and he was going to starve them out. And he decided to remain and starve out the defenders. The siege lasted 2 months until eventually O'Neill, whose ammunition was nearly spent and whose provisions were so low that the townspeople were eating dogs and cats, decided to withdraw. He did so at night, passing unnoticed through a gap into the besiegers' ranks. Next morning, the mayor surrendered the town to Cromwell, who, admiring the bravery of the defenders, refused to sanction a slaughter of the inhabitants. Clonmel was Cromwell's last military action in Ireland. He was recalled by Parliament and on the 29th of May set sail from Youghal in a new frigate. He had been in Ireland for just over 9 months and in that time had reduced the country to submission. Nobody can ever question his bravery. And in England, he received a hero's welcome. But in Ireland, the curse of Cromwell is still used as a malediction. So do you want to sum up his campaign?
Okay. In summing up Cromwell's campaign in Ireland, it is well to note one of his apologies made on Cromwell's behalf by John Buchan. Writing in his book, Cromwell, he makes this point. First, we must note a physical fact. He was in bad health. Before Christmas, he had had an actual breakdown, some form of malaria, which was the country epidemic. But from the start, he boldly condition was abnormal. He had been so ever since the difficult days before the Second Civil War, and it was to continue so in interludes of serious illness till after Worcester. He took a doctor with him, a step which in the old days he would have scorned. The balance of his nature was maladjusted, mind preyed upon body, and the body distempered mind and a body distempered mind. However, nothing can excuse Cromwell's extreme cruelty in Ireland. No matter what his medical condition, the savagery of Drogheda shocked even his most faithful followers, even some of his commanders, including old campaigners like Ludlow, thought the slaughter at Drogheda extraordinary. Cromwell admitted in a letter to Linthal that he personally had led the charge up Mill Mount, although quarter had already been given and revoked by himself at the last minute. Okay, now listen to this. They said quarter had been given, and then he revoked it. In other words, they had already surrendered.
Yes.
And then he accepted their surrender and later said, no, we're not going to accept it. And then he slaughtered them.
Wicked. Yeah.
Again, you can see he was a very two-faced and underhanded man.
Yeah. And you just read as well also, Dr. Clyde, that he was sick. He was sick in his mind and he was sick in his body. And they were saying, he had, periods where basically he'd lose his mind. And this was to continue, and it got so bad that when he went to war, he'd have to take a doctor with him.
Right. Cromwell admitted in a letter to Linthal that he personally had led the charge on Mill Mount, although quarter had already been given and revoked by himself at the last minute. Just as I said, he said they could surrender, then later he changed his mind. The enemy were filled with much terror. And truly, I believe this bitterness would say.
This is an important bit here, Dr. Clyde, that you've just jumped over. I'll just read that bit firstly. He also ordered the firing of St. Peter's Church steeple, in which 100 people were sheltering. His excuse for all this bloodletting was to instill terror and thus save lives. Carry on.
The enemy were filled with much terror.
In the church, 100 people in the church, and he gave the order to fire on the church, killing 100 people in the church. Where was the God? Where was the Catholic God that they were serving? Why did he not come out the sky and save them?
And I remember even today, you can go into a church in any country and they refuse to come in. I know in America, they had some immigrant Mexicans. They wanted to kick them out of the country, but they couldn't go into the church and get them. So the church has always been known historically as a place of sanctuary.
Right, but that didn't count with Cromwell. Yeah. Please carry on. Yeah.
His excuse for all the bloodletting was to instill terror and thus save lives. The enemy were filled with terror, and truly I believe this bitterness will save much blood through the goodness of God. I always saying, God wanted mercy. He didn't have any mercy for anybody. Another reason he gave for the savagery at Drogheda was that it was a righteous judgment of God upon those barbarous wretches who have imbrued their hands in so much innocent blood. Cromwell's third excuse for the slaying of the garrison was that it was the law of war. If the defenders of a fortress which had been summoned to surrender had refused, they then had no claim to mercy. The more so if the fortress was patently indefensible. Of Drogheda, Buchanan writes, and I quote, "In Ireland he was false to his own creed. Never in the English wars except in Basing had he been anything but merciful. He knew that he had erred, and therefore he tried to justify his conduct to Linthal. I think it may fairly be said that no other soldier of the day would have dreamt of. His confusion of spirit is shown by his excuse of a heat of temper, which in his sober moments he would have held to be a sin. It is shown by his childish tale of the blasphemy of some poor creature and the agony of burning, as if that justified the enormity. He is trying to batter his soul into complacence. On the other hand, the chivalry he had displayed at Marston, Moore, and Naseby sometimes returned. For instance, he allowed the garrison of Fernhard, County Tipperary, to surrender and to march out of the town with full military honors. The articles of surrender read as follows, and I quote, "Thus all the officers and soldiers shall march freely with their horses and arms and all other goods, bag and baggage, colors flying, marches, matches lighted, that all the country families and inhabitants, as also any of the officers, may freely live and enjoy their goods, either in town or abroad." The third article is even more extraordinary, that all clergymen and captains of soldiers, both town and country, now in the garrison, may freely march bag and baggage without any annoyance of prejudice in body or goods. Again, as you can see, Cromwell was kind of he was more than a little crazy. His mind was all messed up. Because sometimes he was merciful, other times he was a devil. And it seems as though, just doing all these bloodthirsty things, this just shows that the more evil you do to people, the lot more that you have a lack of grace towards people, it seems that it takes a toll on you as an individual. And it seems to me that we can see him being changed.
Mhm.
The Articles of Surrender were signed by Oliver Cromwell himself. Cromwell, when accepting the surrender of Kilkenny, praised their garrison under the command of Walter Butler, Ormond's brother, for their courage in defense of that city, and also allowed the garrison to march out with bag and baggage and with colors flying. Perhaps Cromwell's character is best summed up in Thomas Carlyle's words: "Armed soldiers, terrible as death, relentless as doom, doing God's judgment on the enemies of God. It is a phenomenon not of joyful nature, no, but of awful to be looked at with pious terror and awe." In other words, in a sense, is that sometimes you lose your mind. I remember when I was a teenager, one of my neighbors, he had been in Vietnam, and he had talked about how he how this Vietnamese woman they had captured, they shot a grenade launcher between her legs just so it could blow her head off, And he was talking like that, and I don't know. I'm here in America. I mean, it didn't seem so logical to me, but the things that people do in war are terrible, and they see nothing wrong with it because they become terrible. But since I hadn't been in a war and I hadn't been over there, I didn't understand it. I didn't like it, and I kind of like being around that fellow.
Mhm. Wow. So thank you so much for that reading. That's chapter 2. Let me read some of the comments from the chat. And then next from, we're going to go into chapter 3, which is the transplantation. So all these people that marched out their towns and cities, all these people that were allowed, to survive, what happened to them? Where did they end up? We've already read that a number of people, 80,000 in one instance, have been transplanted to Barbados, okay? And we're hearing, the descriptions, the names of these people. Are these people ending up in Barbados with those same names? Who are all of these tens of thousands of Irish people who are going to Barbados? We see today the descendants of the Barbadians, don't we? We see today what they look like. So let's go into the chat. Dorothea, welcome. She says, Dr. Catherine Archinolo has identified in her research that Niger Congo has cognates with the Irish language. Cognates with the Irish language. Yes, there we go. More evidence for you to, research family. Many of the Asian translators were of African origin because of the similarities in the language isolates. Yeah. Unfortunately, we remain divided because we want the toys and the proximity to whiteness provides. For real, and this would have been the case as well back in the days where we're reading about. You saw how, the defectors, we saw some of the army going over to the Cromwellian side. We saw, people going behind the back of some of these colonels to make secret deals. Obviously they were fearful for their life while they were doing it, but we were just so divided. And, all of Ireland could see what was happening. Cromwell was going city to city, town to town. Why didn't all the armies of all of those towns come together against Cromwell? Why did they all try to fight his army and resist against his guns as individual towns, individual castles? This is what's happening, to us today. We've got 55 African nations, and these nations are being picked off one by one, some by the French, some by the British, some by the Americans. But rather than all the 55 nations coming together, they're all trying to fight the enemy on a one by one individual basis. So we're keeping you up, Dr. Clyde.
Oh, not really. Really? Not. I'm always I'm always doing that, but no, it's very interesting just to look at this, and because you can see how this whole idea of colonization, especially the Bahamas, especially Barbados, I think it needs it seems as though it's much more intricate in terms of understanding what happened in terms of how Barbados was settled, and also in a sense the fact that they wanted to work these people to death. They wanted to work them to death. They didn't intend on you surviving, and that's why I think they worked those people 14, maybe 20 hours a day, just so that they could make sure that they never came back. They were trying to make sure that the Irish were destroyed as a people, especially the Catholics.
Yeah, absolutely. Dorval says history is convoluted, too convoluted. Only rich elites were writing and assigning myths to their national pride. Yes, indeed. So we're reading what Oliver Cromwell was saying. We're reading about what Parliament was saying. A lot of this is coming from their perspective. And I'm sure if we were to read the stories of, those royalists, the priests, the priests did quite a lot of writing as well, and a lot of their writings have been preserved by the church because they sent their letters to the church. So we have some of what they had to say, which is why we know what's happening from the inside. But I'm sure, if the ordinary person was to be writing, we would know a lot more about these stories. Thank you for that. Errol, rise up. He's saying another great informative show, great information by two great people. Thank you so much. Craig Safar is in the house saying, Dr. Clyde, great knowledge as always. Sister Shanice looking beautiful as always. I just bought a sweater that matches the colors of your nice top. Oh, lovely, lovely. Thank you. We've got Goddess Warrior in the house. Wishing everybody a great day. Dorothea says, Catherine Obijanju Akochanonu book, Eden in Summer on the Niger. Okay, so she's recommending that book. And she's, Sister Karen Keb's in the house. She said, greetings, Sister Shanice and Dr. Winters. Greetings to all my B1 folks, my Black First Brilliant First folks. Rise up, Sister Karen. Great to have you in the house. Now, please do let us know your thoughts about today's presentation about Wexford. At the beginning of the show, Dr. Clyde actually laid out quite a lot of sources that provide evidence about the ethnicity of the Irish. And we put that deliberately at the beginning so that we were clear, from eyewitness accounts and from documented evidence that the Irish, the original Irish, were indeed Black people, were indeed Africans. And we're reading now what happened to all of these Africans that were living in these towns. And what's also really, really interesting to me when I read this, Dr. Clive, is that we get an idea of how Ireland was structured. Obviously, there were all these counties, all these towns all over Ireland. And each of them, they had their castle, they had their royals, they had their gentry, they had their priests and their monks and their nuns and their cathedrals, and they had their population. They had their industries. They were wealthy towns. They had ships. They were into shipbuilding. You know, these were very successful, prosperous towns, very wealthy towns. I mean, the sums of money that the English armies were demanding as well from the towns, if we were to convert that into today's money, we're talking about millions. And so these were very wealthy towns. So these were Africans, Black people, who were the industrialists, the royalists, the priests, the clergies, etc., of all of these towns all over Ireland. And the thing about it is that the Americans are very good at doing research into America and uncovering all of these Black towns that existed that were destroyed by white Americans. And here we are in Britain, you know, with all of these towns that were Black towns destroyed by the English. And we're only just finding out about it. Dr. Clive, anyone in the chat, any comment?
The only thing I can say is that we see the same genocidal behavior among the English people. The English are just very heartless. They're very heartless people. They're but they are Nordic. They're Nazis, you know, and that's one of the reasons why they joined the Nazis and wanted to be on the Nazi side. Is that really, in a sense, is that the British have no humanity to me. They don't have any sense of shame either, because they did the same thing in China. They did it in Japan. Wherever they went, in the Americas, wherever the British went, they destroyed the native people that they could.
And the native people were Africans. The native people were Black people everywhere.
Right.
You know, and this is what happened to us across the globe, and it continues to happen to us. And this is why our history is hidden from us, because they don't want us to see the pattern of events. Oh, Sister Kev says that her phone was dead. That's why, you know, she didn't join us earlier on. We missed you. We missed not having you in the house, but glad you're in here now and that you're going to watch the replay. Jungle Bunny says, I thought the Irish were sent to Jamaica and Brazil mostly. Yes, you're going to read, some were definitely sent to Jamaica, some were sent to Brazil, some were sent to Montserrat. What they didn't want to do was to send all the Irish to the same colonies, because then, you know, they thought that they would inevitably be more mutinies, because we would all get together on those plantations. Karen says, continued health and knowledge to all, spread the knowledge to family and friends, wake them up. Yes, indeed. Please do share. Thank you so much. We need you to share, because, you know, YouTube doesn't allow our videos to pop up on people's feed in the way that it used to. So we need you to spread the knowledge. We need you to share. And please do support our works. Get my book. This is my most recent book, Hidden in the Shadows of Ancient Britain, an Erased African History Restored. Please do get my works, get the works of Dr. Clyde Winters as well. Jungle Bunny says, check out Curimio Ahu. He exposes a lot of real history of British Isles. I think I've come across him before a couple of years ago. Yes, doing great works. Rise up, rise up. And I love, you know, those researchers who are doing the work, you know, and as we are doing here, we're giving you the sources so that you can go away and do the research as well. Our Cable Land Adventures is in the house. Interesting journey, enough respect. Sister Shanice and Dr. Clive. Kashiba's in the house. Hit the like button. Yes, please, family. Please do hit the like button. Thank you. And also, when you leave today, please go into the description under the video and encourage people to watch the video. Let people know what you thought of it. Was it a good video? Was it interesting? Did you learn anything? Please encourage people to watch the video so that they too can learn. Dr. Clyde, our wonderful special guest, thank you so, so much for joining us today. Do you want to leave our audience with any closing remarks?
All I can say is study, 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 study. And see you next week.
Sorry, say that again, please. The line
I
went a bit
said
funny.
study,
All you can
study,
say
study, and
is,
see you next week.
Study, study, study.
yes, indeed. Family, please do join us next strong. Encourage your family and friends to do so. We look forward to seeing you next strong and support our works. Dr. Clyde has written over 50 books. Please make sure that you have at least 5 of them in your library. And if you need to get a present or a gift for anybody, you need to get a present or a gift, why not make one of our books a gift? Make the gift of knowledge what you are imparting to your family and friends. Yeah, we're the ones who are going to have to tell people about our history. We can't expect others to write the truth of our history and to tell us our history. I mean, even today, Dr. Clyde, I was watching a video, and we did the whole series, the last series of episodes, for example, on Persia. We were identifying the fact that the Persians, the original Persians, were Africans. They depicted themselves as Africans. They described themselves as Africans. We could see in the art that they were Africans, in the monuments and the facial features that they were African. And here they are, in this documentary that they did about Persia, got all their people all over it, trying to give the impression that the Persians, were Europeans. What are they doing? Let me tell you what they're doing, family. They're stealing our history. They're putting themselves in the characters and in the countries and in our nations, in our history, because they've already wiped out the indigenous people and they've replaced the indigenous people with people who look like them. And in so doing, are now claiming the history. When we've all gone, if they are successful in their mission, our descendants will no longer exist. This will be a white world. We will be wiped off the face of the earth, and they will be able to claim all of our history, all of our advancements, our achievements, and our accomplishments as their own. This is where it's going. And we are seeing it, land after land. But anyway, we got to wake up and stop being a divided nation and a divided people, okay? Rise up, family.
What makes it even more interesting is you can see how even back then the black people were just so divided. They were just, those black Irish were so divided that that's why they lost, because they were so divided. Then some would fight, some wouldn't fight. Then some would, in a sense, want to be treacherous. Isn't that what's going on today among black people? We just refuse to unify.
We refuse to stand together. And even though we are, 80% of the world population, we are being systematically wiped off of the face of the earth because we refuse to come together.
And another thing that if you notice from reading this example is that it didn't matter what people did to these black Irish, they still would not unify. They still, in a sense, would betray each other. And that's what happens today. No matter what people do to us, we still refuse to unify.
55 African nations, each struggling and fighting the enemy on an individual basis rather than coming together as a collective and unify. But no, you have Burkina Faso over there, and you have ECOWAS wanting to, join forces with the Americans and the French and attack Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. We still refuse to unify. We are
Right.
our own worst enemy, some would say. But anyway, we've gone well over. Thank you so much for staying with us. I'm going to have to take some time out at some point and chop up some of these videos so that people, can watch them in small bite-sized sizes or small chunks, because we do go on in these live sessions and, it may put some people off watching it, but it's great stuff. Great stuff. Dr. Clyde, thank you so much. We love having you here. Will you be joining us next Strong?
Yeah, I can join you if you wish.
Oh, yeah, we do wish. We do wish. Thank you so much. More
And
love, more strength. Bye, family.
also for those who are interested, read chapter 3 so you can be up. If you have questions, read chapter 3, get the book, read along with us.
Yeah, yeah, we should do this with our own book, actually. I got to think of it. Yeah, get the knowledge, family.